Lighting in 3D Studio Max is a blast, and it's incredibly rich because there's so many different types of lights that you can create and so many different ways to use them. So you create a light just like you create any other geometry. You come over to the Create tab, and this time you go to the Lights category, and then there's a few different categories within that. There's Standard and there's Photometric. Standard lights are the ones you use more often, and photometric lights use realistic equations to distribute light energy and all this kind of stuff. And they're fun to work with. We probably won't talk about them in intro here. We'll get into them in a lighting specific lessons, but you'll find yourself using them less anyway, because what happens at the end of the day is that specifying lighting values in terms of real energy, while sometimes feeling intuitive, can often backfire, and it can be more difficult to get the result that you want. You know, it's easier to get something initially, but then when you want to adjust it or tweak it, it can be a little bit tricky. So photometric lights aren't something that you use very often unless if you're doing architectural renderings, then it becomes very helpful because you can specify lights in terms of their color, in terms of what type of light they are, which again is kind of cool, and they're fun to goof around with, so you can see what sort of color ranges some of these lights have. But they are a little bit tricky to fine-tune and tweak. Now, 3D Studio does its absolute best to give you things like multipliers and filter colors, so that even if the color of any one of these lights is not quite right for you, then you can make adjustments fairly easily. However, it's more common to use these standard lights, and they provide most of the functionality that we'll need, especially here in introduction of it at the very least. So let me go through some of the standard lights that you have here. You see there's quite a few up here. There's these two at the bottom here called MR Area Omni and MR Area Spot. MR stands for mental ray, which again is something that we're going to have to defer to until later when we can have an in-depth discussion about mental ray, which is another renderer that ships with 3D Studio Max. And it has its own set of parameters and things for different kinds of lights. And so we're going to focus right now on these first top 6 here. And then really, when you boil it down, you have a target spot and a free spot, a target direct, a free direct, and an omni and a skylight. So these two, target and free, spot and direct, really are kind of the same. They're the same kind of light. It just happens to be if they have a specific aim point or not. And so the parameters of each target and free of each one of these types here are the same. So there's really only spot, direct, omni, and skylight that we're going to work with. It's really only 4 lights right now. And those are the same 4 basic lights. Actually, same 3 basic lights you'd find in most 3D packages. Skylight is a slightly different thing. We looked at a skylight when we were doing our neutral, texture render of the object that we built. And so I guess really it gets down to there's really only 3 different light types here. And those are the same 3 light primitives you'd find in anything. So let's look at how to make these. So if we make the most, the easiest type to imagine to start out with is an omni. And so I click on the button to create an omni, and this works like creating geometry. Now I'm in omni creation mode, and I can just go in and click, point some omni lights in here, put some down. It also will work with auto grid, so I could put lights in very particular places if I wanted to, which is incredibly handy for doing lights. Like if I have a source like this and I want to put some lights in there, that's really handy to use. I'm going to put it on the ground for right now. So I have my omni light right here, and you see as I create it, I can drag it around on the grid, and 3D Studio kind of does its best to give you a little bit of preview of what this light is going to look like. So I'm going to just let go, drop it, and I'm still in omni creation mode. I could go ahead and begin creating some more if I wanted to, or I can right click and get out of that mode.